Hello and welcome back to Pin My Podfics. This will be the reading of Chapter 14, Grief and Legacy, Part 1, 2, and 3. Well, basically the whole chapter of the fic called After the Fall by innocent_reader. And yeah, I'm gonna get on with this whole chapter. Chapter 14, Grief and Legacy, Part 1. The silence that followed seemed to have a weight of its own. The watchtower's command center, with its panels still humming faintly from the background systems, felt larger than ever. The metallic echo of the room amplified every breath, every restrained movement, as if even the air had grown too heavy to breathe. The empty chairs arranged around the command table looked like seats reserved for ghosts. It was easy to imagine that, in another time, they'd be occupied by Diana, Clark, Bruce, Arthur, all of them debating strategies, drawing plans, saving the world. Now, only the emptiness remained. Cold lights reflected against the vast glass windows overlooking the earth below. The planet spun silently in space, serene and calm, a cruel contrast to the chaos they all knew was raging beneath its surface. Dick felt his chest tighten. The space, once sacred as a symbol of unity, now felt like a mausoleum. And for several minutes, no one dared to utter a single word. Dick stood still, eyes locked on the dead screen. Alan Scott's words echoed in his mind, reverberating like an inevitable verdict. They're organizing a funeral for the entire Justice League. Beside him, Wally sat with his arms crossed, head lowered, wrestling against a storm only he could feel. Zatanna clenched her fists on her knees, seated in the control table, staring at the floor as if she might shatter into pieces at any moment. Roy kept his distance, leaning against one of the steel columns, his hollow eyes fixed on the vastness of space beyond the window, pretending at a control he didn't actually have. And Midoriya, he just sat there quietly in one of the swivel chairs, hugging his own arms as though trying to ward off a cold that wasn't really there. His eyes shifted from face to face, quietly studying the broken expressions of heroes who, until recently, had only been legends to him. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating like fog. Midoriya cleared his throat before speaking, as if he had to summon courage just to pierce that silence. His voice came out low, uncertain, every word tiptoeing on a forbidden ground. I know this isn't the right time, but... He looked down at his hands, pressing his fingers into his arms. The Justice League. What were they like? The question hung in the air like shrapnel, slicing through every other thought. Midoriya instantly felt all their eyes turned toward him, filled with surprise, pain, and in some cases, even indignation. He swallowed hard, trying to explain himself in a rush. I never knew them. I read about them, watched all recordings, but it's not the same. His voice cracked, raw and sincere. For you, they were everything. I just want to understand. The silence grew heavier, as though even the watchtower itself held its breath. Wally was the first to react. He dragged both hands down his face, covering his eyes as if the question itself was too much to bear. His chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath sharper than the last. Zatanna squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers gripping the fabric of her uniform in her lap. To her, the question wasn't just a reminder. It was like hearing the echo of her father's voice calling her Z before he disappeared forever. Roy turned away instantly, his jaw clenching hard. The muscle twitched as if fighting against the tears he refused to shed. Dick remained motionless for a few long seconds, the tension etched along his face, betraying the weight he carried. He didn't scold Midoriya. He didn't shut him down. He simply closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and forced himself to answer. Dick opened his eyes slowly, the air still trapped in his chest. Straightening slightly, he seemed to wrestle with himself, every word harder than any battle. They were... His voice came out rough, faltering at first. He had to swallow hard, his fingers digging into the table's edge until his knuckles turned white. They were... the rest of us. He lifted his gaze to Midoriya, not with reproach, but with raw pain. Not just heroes. They were family, mentors, parents. Each word trembled, but he refused to stop. When the world was falling apart, they held it together, even when they were breaking inside, even when no one could see it. For a moment, Dick's eyes fell to the metallic floor beneath his feet. Bruce. The name slipped out barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the silent chamber. He wasn't just Batman. He was the man who saved me, took me from a ruined circus, gave me a home, a mission, a family. His breathing grew heavier, eyes wet, but no tears fell. He raised his chin again, burying the pain like armor. Everything I am, everything, is because he believed in me, even when he didn't believe in himself. Wally let out a nervous laugh that dissolved almost immediately into something closer to a sob. He rubbed his face, his fingers trembling. Barry, he was the most optimistic guy I ever met. His voice cracked right away. Always had a joke ready. Always found a way to make me smile. He shook his head, eyes glassy. But it wasn't like because life was easy for him. It was because he knew that if he didn't laugh, no one else would. He ran faster than anyone else, not just because he could, but because he thought he had to save everyone, be everywhere, all at once. His breath hitched, his voice breaking. And in the air, he was fast enough to save us, but not fast enough to save himself. His hands dropped slowly into his lap, his shoulders trembling. Roy cleared his throat, trying to hold steady, but his voice came out low, rough, and laced with both bitterness and grief. Oliver. He started with a humorless laugh, shaking his head. Oliver was an idiot, arrogant, stubborn, always thought that he was the only one who knew what was right. And I spent half my life pissed at him for it. Roy closed his eyes, taking in a sharp breath, but he kept going. But he never stopped fighting. Never even when everything was falling apart, he still believed the world could be better. And that we had the obligation to try, even if it was impossible. His voice faltered, and he turned his face away as if unwilling to let them see him crack. He taught me everything, how to shoot, how to survive, how to stand up after every fall. Roy paused, the silence stretching painfully before he whispered again, his voice breaking. And now he's gone, and I never told him that I forgave him. He turned his gaze away, fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white as if trying to hold back anger that no longer had anywhere to go. Zatanna was slower to speak. Her fingers trembled against the napkin she still held, and when she finally raised her eyes, they were already glistening with tears. My father, Zatara. Her voice cracked, forcing her to take a deep breath before continuing. He was always the greatest magician I ever knew. Everyone saw him that way, but to me, he was just my dad. She swallowed hard, and a fragile smile flickered across her lips. I remember the nights when he'd catch me sneaking spells in my room. He never scolded me, he'd just rest his hand on my shoulder and say, Z, even magic needs sleep. A small laughter escaped her, soft, fleeting, before it broke into sobs. I never listened, not once. And tears finally slipped free, streaming down her face as she shut her eyes tight. During the invasion, he paid the price alone. He did what he always did. He protected others before himself. Her voice collapsed into a whisper, raw and childlike. And I didn't have the strength to save him. She turned her head, trying to hide her face, but the weight of her confession filled the room. Midoriya's chest tightened, words locked on in his throat. His eyes shifted between them, each drowning in their grief. And even without having known these heroes personally, he understood. The emptiness, the loss, the kind of absence that cut deeper than any wound. That was when Dick lifted his eyes again. His voice was low, steady, as if he were speaking to everyone at once. Or maybe to no one in particular. They were the Justice League. Not just superheroes, but symbols of hope, of strength. Proof that no matter how dark the world got, there would always be someone willing to stand and fight. Wally nodded faintly, a sad smile tugging at his lips. And now, I guess that someone is us. No one answered. They didn't need to. Midoriya lowered his head, staring at the floor, the weight of this world, so different yet so painfully familiar to his own, finally pressed down on him. They remained there for long minutes, wrapped in the silence only grief can build, but beneath it, faint and fragile, lingered a truth none of them could deny. Despite everything, they weren't alone. Part 2. After leaving the control room behind, the group kept walking through the watchtower, quieter than ever. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy, thick with things unsaid, as if the walls themselves whispered all the memories they couldn't put into words. The corridors led them almost instinctively through familiar passages until turning a corner. They found themselves in front of one of the training rooms. The door was slightly ajar, spilling a faint strip of light across the dim corridor. Dick was the first to stop, his hand brushing the door frame, his eyes fixed on the space inside. Nothing had changed within. The elevated platform still stood tall. The obstacle nets hung motionless from the ceiling, and the combat dummies bore the scars of countless drills, scratches, burns, deep cuts that testified to battles long past, as if from another lifetime. The air smelled of dust, laced faintly with iron and oil. It felt like time itself had stopped the moment the League abandoned that space, leaving it as a silent memorial. None of them stepped inside. For a few seconds, they just stood there, each feeling the weight of the room in their own way. Wally looked away, swallowing hard. Zatanna pressed her fingers into her cloak, as if holding back a painful memory. Roy stayed rigid, his stillness a clear sign of his discomfort. It was Dick who broke the silence, his voice low, almost reverent. We haven't really stopped to face this, have we? Then his gaze turned toward Midoriya. The boy frowned at first, confused until the memory hit him with force. His body had changed. Everyone had noticed it from day one. His frame now perfectly portioned, sculpted, his skin without scars, the raw, unearned strength he carried. And here, in front of these scarred dummies and quiet platforms, he was forced to confront it. Midoriya slowly raised his hands, opening and closing his fingers as if seeing them for the very first time. Yeah, he muttered, hesitant. I'd almost forgotten. The silence fell again until Wally tried to ease it, letting out a shaky laugh. Forgotten? Man, you look like you walked straight out of a Greek statue catalog. Forgetting that is impossible. Dick kept his hand against the doorframe, his voice firm as he looked back into the room. We should use the watchtower's facilities to investigate this. Now? Midoriya asked, eyebrows raised. Dick shrugged. Why not? We've got everything here. Equipment, databases. He glanced at the others, who nodded in agreement. It might help to understand what happened to you. Midoriya hesitated. He wanted to, but not now, not yet. His mind was too crowded. It was just as empty as the watchtower itself. And besides, there was something else they had to do first. He shook his head gently. No, not today. I think this can wait. They lingered a moment longer at the doorway, as if simply looking into the training room was its own silent act of respect. None of them said it aloud. But they all knew the space still held the echoes of voices no longer there. Orders, laughter, arguments, advice. Dick was the first to move, closing the door with care. The soft click of wood against frame echoed down the corridor like a period at the end of a sentence. Just one more reason to come back, he murmured, almost to himself. No one answered, but their footsteps down the corridor carried a new weight. It wasn't just the silence of morning anymore. It was the awareness that they were walking towards something they could no longer delay. The farewell. The silence stretched with every step until Wally suddenly stopped. Hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes fixed on the polished marble floor. He took a deep breath, like even a simple sentence demanded courage. The League, he his voice lower than usual, almost swallowed by the echo of the corridor. The League deserves a funeral, a collective one, all of them. For a moment, no one spoke, but the words hung there, reverberating between them like an undeniable truth. Zatanna was the first to lift her gaze, and even without speaking, the shimmer in her tear-filled eyes confirmed that what they were all already thinking. Roy nodded, his eyes distant, focused on something beyond the hallway. Yeah, but... He paused, breathing heavily. I need my own goodbye too. Something personal. Zatanna clenched her fists, but she kept her chin high. So do I. Dick didn't need to say anything. They already knew. It was Midoriya who asked, his voice small, as if he feared the answer. You want separate funerals? Dick leaned against the wall, looking at the group before answering. We'll hold a collective funeral. That's the least we can do. But each of us also needs to do this on our own, in our own way, for the one we love the most. He turned to Ollie, who nodded with a sad smile. For Barry, he said simply, then to Roy, who didn't hide the pain in his eyes. For Oliver. Zatanna took a deep breath, her voice breaking. For my father. And finally, Dick lowered his gaze, closing his eyes for a moment. For Bruce. The name lingered in the air like a whisper, too heavy to ignore, yet too late to fill the void it left behind. Midoriya stayed silent, his eyes moving from one to the other, taking in every word as if each was a blow to his chest. He hadn't known Oliver Queen, or Zatara, or Bruce Wayne, but hearing them speak, he felt as if he had trespassed into a place he didn't belong. Hands clenched the hem of his shirt, knuckles white. The weight of this was unlike any battle. It wasn't just pain. It was history, legacy, something he didn't have. They carry the memory of those who raised them, who shaped them, he thought, his heart racing. I don't have that here. I don't belong to this world. I don't share this pain or this legacy. He took a shaky breath, his throat tight. The comparison rose unbidden. All Might, the man who had been his symbol in another world, a memory distant and unreachable, one no one here could ever understand. Finally, with a trembling voice, Midoriya whispered, I don't have anyone to remember here. I don't have a legacy like you. The words hit the air heavy. They weren't self-pity, not a complaint, just a raw truth. A reminder that he came from somewhere else, and that his presence among them was an exception in a world not his own. The group turned to him while he bit his lip, unsure what to say. Zatanna lifted her gaze, eyes soft with unspoken compassion. Roy kept his expression hard, but looked away as if the honesty of that confession had struck somewhere deep. But Dick stepped forward. He stopped in front of Midoriya, his gaze steady, his voice low, almost a whisper. Then, build one. Midoriya's eyes widened, startled. Dick continued, calm but unwavering. You don't have to be from this world to leave your mark on it. None of us started with a legacy. We only inherited one because we survived. And now it's your turn. The silence that followed was different now. No longer just mourning. Something had sparked. A flicker. Something new being born. Part 3. Before leaving, the group gathered once more in the command room. The central console still glowed with a cold, bluish light, casting sharp beams across their weary faces. The same walls, the same machines. And yet, everything felt different now. The watchtower, once a symbol of power and unity, now hung in orbit like a mausoleum. Dick stepped up to the main terminal, his fingers moving with precision across the controls. The metallic clicks echoed through the vast chamber until a soft beep confirmed the operation. He pressed both palms against the console, exhaling slowly. "Done," he said firmly. "The link between the watchtower and the Batcave will remain active. Always." It wasn't just a technical adjustment, it was a bond, an invisible thread connecting past to future, the fallen to the living, what had been lost to what still might endure. The others nodded quietly, as if instinctively understanding the weight behind his words. For a long moment, they stood still, gazing at the monitors, at the stars beyond, almost as if watching for old voices to echo back. But the only answers was the low hum of the systems. Zatanna was the first to break the silence. She stepped forward, resting a hand lightly on the console, like someone sealing a vow. "Magic still needs me," she said softly, though her voice didn't waver. Her eyes shimmered, but her resolve didn't falter. "My father spent his life fighting forces that could have destroyed the world. If I stopped now, it would make his sacrifice meaningless." Roy uncrossed his arms and stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the console screen. There was an old archive where an old archive still showed Oliver Queen, grinning among the League. "Ollie was a fool," Roy said, his voice sharp. Arrogant, stubborn, always convinced he knew better than everyone else. But he never backed down from what he believed in. Not once. His breath hitched, but he pushed through. "If I don't keep going, if I don't carry that forward, then all the hell he put me through won't mean anything, and I won't let his legacy die with me." Wally lifted his head, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. This time there was no attempt at a smile. His voice trembled, fragile but true. Barry ran to protect the whole world, always fast, always there before anyone else. And now, the world is slower, broken, but I can't let that be a reason to stop. If he was everywhere he was needed, then I will be too, even if it's step by step. Dick closed his eyes briefly, absorbing every word when he spoke. His tone was low and solemn. "The League has fallen," he said, letting the truth hang in the air. "But what they stood for cannot fall with them. We're not here to replace anyone. We're here to carry it forward." The four of them turned their eyes to Midoriya. He hesitated. The words seemed trapped in his throat. Finally, he raised his head, his eyes green, shining beneath the console's cold glow. I never knew the League," he admitted, his voice raw. "I didn't fight beside them. I didn't grow up in their shadow. I don't have a legacy here." The silence thickened again. Midoriya clenched his fists, drawing in a shaky breath before finishing. "But I've seen what they mean. I've seen what you've lost. And if what's left of this world needs someone, then I'll fight. Not for what I'm inherited, but for what we can build. A knot formed in Dick's throat, but a faint, satisfied smile broke through. No one else spoke. They didn't need to. For a few seconds, they simply stood together, committing the unspoken promise to memory. The Justice League's legacy would live on, not as copies, but as continuation. At last, Dick turned and activated the teleport sequence. The soft pulse of energy filled the chamber. Emergency lights glowed golden, wrapping the 5 of them in a translucent field, like a radiant cocoon. They gathered in the center of the platform, shoulder to shoulder. The beam flared around them, a brilliant light that felt more spiritual than technological. And in the blink of an eye, they were gone. The command room fell silent. The monitors still pulsed faintly. The watchtower suspended in orbit high above Earth was no longer just an abandoned station. It had become something else. At once a mausoleum and a beacon. A monument reminding the world that hope could still endure. And down below, new heroes were already preparing to carry the mantle the League had left behind. And that was the end of Chapter 14, Grief and Legacy, of the fic called After the Fall by Innocent with _reader. And I've figured out a way to try and reduce any white noise. What you're hearing right now is my laptop overheating the fuck out. Because I'm recording this on my phone and I'm reading on my laptop and it's overheating so much. And also because since I live 10 minutes away from an airport, there is always, and it's summer, so there's at least 5 flights a day. So yeah, and also my neighbors are loud as fuck. And I need to leave the windows open or else I'm probably gonna suffocate in this room. And so, yeah, have a good, whatever time of day it is, hydrate or die straight, I guess. Bye.